On an October afternoon in 1984, a 40-year-old airline pilot still smelling faintly of jet fuel is told that in less than 24 hours he must take control of a country of 700 million people or watch it tear itself apart in riots and revenge. Outside the room, party bosses whisper names of other contenders, rivals sharpen their smiles, and the phones will not stop ringing. India is bleeding, power is up for grabs, and every minute he hesitates, someone else moves closer to the throne. This man was never supposed to be here. For most of his life, Rajiv Gandhi had done everything he could to stay away from politics, to stay away from the world of slogans and speeches and backroom deals. He had wanted engines and clouds, not parliaments and crowds. He had found love in a foreign cafe, not in the corridors of Delhi. And yet, step by step, tragedy by tragedy, he was being pushed onto a path he had sworn he would never walk. To understand how a reluctant pilot became the last hope of a wounded nation, we have to go back to a different India, a different time, and a boy who grew up in a house where history itself sat down to dinner. Rajiv Ratna Gandhi was born on 20th of August 1944 in Bombay, in a country that technically didn't exist yet. British India was still under colonial rule. The Second World War was raging and air raid sirens wailed over the city at night. He was the first child of Indira Gandhi and Feroz Gandhi, born into a family whose surname already carried enormous weight, though, in reality, it was pure coincidence. The Gandhi of this young boy had nothing to do, by blood, with Mahatma Gandhi, but for millions the names blurred and the expectations grew. His maternal grandfather was Jawaharlal Nehru, the man who would soon become the first prime minister of independent India. While most Indian children of the time were born into uncertainty and poverty, Rajiv's earliest memories were framed by carved wooden railings, manicured lawns, and visitors who argued about the fate of an entire subcontinent over cups of tea. In Allahabad, at the family home Anand Bhavan, history crashed through the front gates like a monsoon. Leaders of the freedom movement came and went. Maps were unfolded and refolded on wooden tables. Late at night, when Rajiv was supposed to be asleep, he could hear the muffled voices of men and women arguing about borders, about Pakistan, about the cost of freedom. Somewhere upstairs, his grandfather paced, chain-smoking, unable to rest. And outside those walls, the old world was burning. When India was finally partitioned in 1947, Rajiv was only 3. Too young to understand lines on a map, but not too young to sense the terror in the adults' eyes. Refugees poured into cities, trains arrived packed with bodies, and fires glowed on the horizon. In Delhi, where his family now spent much of their time, mobs roamed streets he would later drive through as an adult. In that chaos, Jawaharlal Nehru stood on the Red Fort and spoke about India's tryst with destiny. Somewhere nearby, a little boy clutched his mother's hand as she tried to keep him away from open windows. Those early years forged a strange duality in Rajiv. Inside the house, order, books, English tutors, careful conversations. Outside, a roaring, chaotic democracy being born in blood and dust. From the very beginning, he lived in the contradiction between privilege and upheaval. He saw less of his parents than most boys. Feroz Gandhi was an active politician, a fiery parliamentarian who read out corruption scandals in the Lok Sabha with a sharp tongue and no fear. Indira Gandhi, first as Nehru's assistant and later as a political figure in her own right, moved constantly between Delhi and her father's side. There were long absences, hurried returns, and strange nights when the house would suddenly be filled with police protection or go eerily quiet before some important vote. For Rajiv, safety came in simple things: tinkering with tools, taking apart toys to see how they worked, watching aeroplanes slice. The sky above Delhi's dusty plains. He liked machines because they obeyed rules. If something went wrong, there was a reason: a broken gear, a loose wire. Politics, by comparison, looked like chaos without logic. He never wanted to be part of it. At school, at the Doon School in Dehradun, that distance grew even sharper. Doon was an elite boarding school, sometimes called the Eton of India, a place where the sons of industrialists, princes, and officials learned to speak the language of power. For Rajiv, it was also a refuge from the suffocating attention in Delhi. Yet even here, his name walked into every room before he did. He was Nehru's grandson, and the teachers knew it. Some boys were drawn to him out of curiosity, others out of ambition. But Rajiv himself hung back, quieter than his younger brother Sanjay, less interested in student politics, more likely to be found with a camera in his hand or his head under the hood of an engine. He loved photography, Western music, the feeling of getting a gadget to finally work. On the playing field, he was competent but not obsessed. In the debating hall, he was almost invisible. While the country outside experimented with democracy, the first general elections in the 1950s, the early economic plans, the wars. Of words in Parliament, Rajiv's private universe revolved around more ordinary concerns: exams, holidays, occasional glimpses of his famous grandfather. Nehru, often exhausted by the demands of being prime minister, would still find time to write letters to his grandson, urging him to be curious, to read, to think beyond the narrowness of any one career. But Nehru also cast a long, heavy shadow. When the old man died in 1964, the entire country went into mourning. Funeral processions filled the avenues of Delhi, men and women cried in the streets, and foreign dignitaries flew in from around the world. For Rajiv, it was not just the loss of a beloved grandfather. It was the moment when he truly saw for the first time how different his family was from almost everyone else's, how his private grief was also a national spectacle. In that same year, another transformation began. Rajiv, now in his late teens, left India for England to study at Trinity College, Cambridge. The colonial loop turned back on itself. The grandson of independent India's first prime minister walking past the spires where British officials had once been trained to rule his country. Cambridge in the 1960s was a world away from Anand Bhavan. Cafes hummed with talk of Marx and Vietnam. Bob Dylan played in smoky rooms. Students debated nuclear disarmament and civil rights. Here, Rajiv could almost be anonymous, just another foreign student juggling lectures, tutorials, and the miserable English weather. He enrolled to study mechanical engineering, a natural extension of his love for machines. But the lectures felt abstract, the pace relentless, and he struggled with the demands of the course. Friends from that period remember a gentle, shy young man more interested in listening than arguing, more likely to be found at a music concert than at a political rally. And then, in a small Italian restaurant in Cambridge, his life took a turn that would eventually drag him back to India and into history. One evening, Rajiv walked into a place where a young Italian girl named Sonia Mino was working part-time to pay her bills. She had come from a town near Turin with no connection to India, no knowledge of its complicated dynasties. To her, he was not the prime minister's grandson. He was just a quiet, dark-eyed student who seemed a little lost and a little lonely. They talked, then talked again and again. Soon, Rajiv was taking the train not to lectures but to see Sonia. They listened to music together, went for walks along the river, built a tiny, fragile world of their own, an Indian political prince, and an Italian girl who wanted nothing to do with politics at all. For once, his life was not defined by someone else's expectations. But outside that world, the clock was ticking. Back in India, power was shifting. After Nehru's death, Lal Bahadur Shastri had briefly taken over as prime minister, only to die suddenly in Tashkent in 1966. Indira Gandhi, Rajiv's mother, was chosen as a compromise candidate, someone the party bosses believed they could control. They were wrong. She began to assert herself, split the party, and slowly, ruthlessly, gathered all real power into her own hands. From thousands of kilometers away, Rajiv watched this transformation with mixed feelings. His mother was no longer just mummy. She was Madam Prime Minister, the most powerful person in India. But he in Cambridge was struggling with his own studies, feeling a growing distance between who he was and what the world assumed he would become. Eventually, the gap became too wide. He left Trinity without a degree. For a brief time, he studied at Imperial College in London, but his heart was no longer in traditional academics. What excited him were engines, real ones, roaring, flying, carrying people across continents. He began training as a pilot. Returning to India in the late 1960s, Rajiv made a decision that stunned many in Delhi's political universe. While the son of the prime minister could have walked into almost any corner of the government, he joined Indian Airlines as a professional pilot, not as a ceremonial figure, not as an executive, but as a man in uniform, flying scheduled routes, taking orders from his supervisors like anyone else. It was a deliberate rebellion against his destiny. In 1968, he married Sonia in Delhi. Their wedding was simple by political standards, with a small ceremony that blended Hindu and Christian elements. For a moment, the fierce world of Indian politics softened. There were family photographs on the lawn, Nehru's portrait looking down from the wall, and two young people believing, perhaps naively, that they could build a life insulated from the storms raging outside. Two children followed, Rahul in 1970, Priyanka in 1972. They lived in a modest bungalow on Safdarjung Road, close to where Indira herself lived. Rajiv's daily routine was almost boring. Early mornings at the airport, flight plans, checklists, the long, lonely concentration of the cockpit, the satisfaction of a smooth landing. Sometimes passengers recognized him and whispered, "That's the Prime Minister's son." Usually he just smiled awkwardly and went back to his instruments. Up in the sky, India looked peaceful. Green fields, brown rivers, the jagged outlines of cities. From 30,000 feet, you couldn't see the slums, the corruption, the rising anger. For years, Rajiv stayed above the turbulence. His younger brother, Sanjay, did not. If Rajiv was the quiet engineer, Sanjay was the turbocharged engine with no brakes. Dropping out of formal studies, obsessed with cars and speed, Sanjay stayed close to their mother and slipped naturally into the world of power she inhabited. He became her closest political confidant, her informal enforcer, the man many believed was being groomed to take over one day. In the mid-1970s, that began to terrify the rest of India. Facing growing unrest, court challenges, and criticism from the press, Indira Gandhi made a decision that would define her legacy forever. In June 1975, she declared a state of emergency. Overnight, democracy was put on hold. Opposition leaders were arrested, newspapers censored, dissent silenced. In this dark new India, Sanjay's influence soared. He spearheaded aggressive campaigns for family planning and slum beautification in Delhi. For the poor, that often meant something brutal. Men dragged into vans for forced sterilizations, entire neighborhoods bulldozed. In a matter of hours, families watching their houses reduced to dust in the name of development. Rajiv watched all this from an impossible position. On one side was his mother, under siege, insisting that the emergency was necessary to save India from anarchy. On another was his brother, charging forward like a storm, adored by some, feared by many. And on the other side was the rest of India, stunned, humiliated, furious. Friends later recalled that Rajiv was uneasy, uncomfortable with the authoritarian turn, but also deeply loyal. He did not break publicly with his mother, did not attack Sanjay in the press. Instead, he tried to keep flying, tried to keep his family safe, tried not to be drawn into the vortex. But history does not care about your preferences. When the emergency was finally lifted in 1977 and elections were held, Indira Gandhi and her party were crushed. The opposition Janata Party came to power, and for the first time since independence, the Nehru-Gandhi dynasty was out. Indira lost her own seat. Overnight, the Gandhis went from rulers to targets. Investigations followed. Accusations were hurled in parliament. Former allies turned into bitter enemies. The new government vowed to dismantle the entire structure of power that Indira had built. Through it all, Rajiv kept flying. His one clear rival in the family drama, Sanjay, plunged even deeper into politics. He won a seat in parliament when Indira began her comeback. He rebuilt their mother's organization, gathered around himself a circle of fierce loyalists, and moved through Delhi as if the city belonged to him. For those who hated the emergency, he became the symbol of everything that had gone wrong. For those who still adored Indira, he was the future. And Rajiv, he was the man on the other side of the runway. The one who kept trying to walk away from the stage where history was being played out. The one who, friends say, insisted more than once, "Politics is not for me. Sanjay is the one for that." In 1980, the wheel turned again. The Janata coalition imploded under its own contradictions. Disillusioned voters handed power back to Indira Gandhi in a decisive victory. Congress returned to office, Indira returned to the Prime Minister's chair, and Sanjay became the most powerful unelected man in India. A force within the government, the unspoken heir apparent. The rivalry between the brothers was not open warfare. It was a quieter, more painful tension. One was the chosen political prince, burning fast and bright. The other, the reluctant elder, watching from a distance as his own future narrowed into the cockpit of an airliner. Then fate intervened, brutally. On 23rd of June 1980, on a hot Delhi morning, Sanjay Gandhi took off in a small aircraft from Safdarjung Airport. Witnesses say he attempted aerobatic maneuvers at low altitude. The plane stalled and plunged into the ground, shattering on impact. By the time help arrived, Sanjay was dead. The news tore through the country like a shockwave. At the crash site, metal twisted in the sun. The smell of fuel hung in the air. For a moment, time froze. The chosen heir, the brash enforcer, was gone. Just like that, in an instant of overconfidence and bad luck. In the Gandhi household, grief was almost animal in its intensity. Indira, who had built her entire political future around this son, was described by aides as broken in half. But the clock of power does not stop even for mourning. Within hours, within days, whispers began in Delhi's corridors. Who now? Who would stand next to Indira? Who would inherit the party, the name, the machine? Senior Congress leaders, some of whom had spent years resenting Sanjay's dominance, suddenly saw a vacuum. Opposition parties smelled opportunity. The carefully constructed system around the Gandhis had lost one of its central pillars. All eyes turned to the one man who had spent his life avoiding this moment. Rajiv Gandhi, the pilot, the family man, found himself standing at a brutal crossroads. On one side, the quiet life he had built with Sonia and their children, the predictable rhythm of flight schedules, the comfort of being important but not central. On the other, a world of ruthless competition, betrayal, and danger, in which his mother was already wounded and surrounded, and in which rivals inside and outside the Congress party were circling. The pressure was relentless. Party workers begged him. Old family loyalists told him that without a Gandhi at the helm, Congress would fall apart before the next election. Indira herself, devastated by Sanjay's death, leaned on him more and more. "We don't have much time," she is said to have warned in private. "If we don't rebuild now, they will destroy everything we have done." Time had become a weapon. The next general election loomed somewhere on the horizon. The opposition was regrouping. Within Congress, ambitious leaders were quietly preparing to step into any vacuum. Rajiv understood the message. Either he stepped forward soon, or by the time he was ready, there would be nothing left to inherit. For a while, he resisted. He clung to his cockpit, his anonymity, the illusion that someone else could carry the burden. But tragedy has its own gravity, and the expectations of a billion eyes are hard to ignore. In 1981, he gave in. Rajiv Gandhi resigned from Indian Airlines. The uniform that had shielded him from politics was folded and put away. He joined the Indian National Congress formally, not as a symbolic figurehead, but as a candidate ready to stand for election. His chosen battleground, Amethi, the Uttar Pradesh constituency that had once belonged to Sanjay. The campaign was both surreal and brutal. On stage, Rajiv was visibly uncomfortable at first. A pilot trying to learn the language of the masses, a man more used to cockpit instruments than to microphones and slogans. In the crowds, there were tears for Sanjay, curiosity about this quieter brother, and skepticism from old Congress bosses who whispered that he was too soft, too Western, too slow to survive the knife fight of Indian politics. But Rajiv had one weapon that none of his internal rivals could touch: the Gandhi name, soaked in both hope and blood. He won Amethi by a massive margin. In Parliament, he sat on the benches where his father and grandfather had once spoken fiery words. It was a twist no one could have fully predicted. The man who had sworn to stay away from politics now walking the same corridors as Nehru, his ID card stamped with Member of Parliament. For his rivals inside the party, the countdown began. How long before this novice, this former pilot, became more than just a symbol? How long before he climbed higher, perhaps too high for them to reach? For Rajiv, the countdown was different. He had a few short years before the next elections, before Indira's enemies moved in again, to learn an entirely new world, to prove to skeptical party bosses that he was not just a surname, and to convince a restless nation that he was more than the shadow of a dead brother. The man who once measured his life in flight hours now found his days divided into something far more dangerous: speeches, strategy, meetings, muttered threats, and the endless ticking of political time. Somewhere ahead, unseen but approaching fast, a moment was coming when he would be asked to do something no pilot is trained for: to take control of a crashing country, with the whole world watching and no chance to turn back. He is given 15 minutes. 15 minutes to step out of his brother's shadow, 15 minutes to prove to a stadium of 100,000 people and to a row of stone-faced party bosses behind him that he is not just a grieving son in a white kurta, but a man who can carry the weight of their hopes and their deals. The television cameras are already rolling. The sun is brutal, the air thick with dust and the smell of sweat and cheap incense. Behind the stage, banners scream, "Long live Indira," and Rajiv Gandhi Zindabad. In the front row, his sharpest internal rival adjusts his spectacles and leans over to an ally. "Let him speak," the rival murmurs. "If he stumbles today, we will have 5 years to tear him apart." Rajiv Gandhi steps up to the microphone, heart racing faster than any takeoff he has ever flown, and looks out at the roaring ocean of faces. He has spent his life avoiding this moment. Now, every second he hesitates, someone else in his own party moves closer to the throne. This is not a campaign for a seat anymore. This is an audition for power. After Sanjay's death in 1980, the transformation of Rajiv from airline pilot to politician is not instant. It is a slow, painful negotiation between duty and fear, and it begins with smaller steps, each one dragging him deeper into a world he does not fully trust. Once elected from Amethi, he starts the long, humiliating apprenticeship that few remember today. There are endless tours through dusty small towns, sitting on the floor in village huts, listening to complaints about electricity, ration cards, water pumps. There are funerals of forgotten party workers, inaugurations of school buildings that will never be finished, and midnight strategy. Sessions where old Congress barons test him with half-truths. He studies politics the way he once studied flight manuals, obsessively, methodically, but with a crucial difference. Here, the rules are not written. Indira Gandhi senses time closing in. She is in her 60s now, her hair gone completely gray, her once iron grip on India loosened by the trauma of the emergency and the brief loss of power. She knows the opposition is regrouping, that new regional forces are rising in the states, that her own party is divided between the loyalists who depend on her and the ambitious men who are simply waiting for nature to take its course. Among those men, one stands out. He is older, experienced, a veteran of countless cabinet meetings and budget battles. He has spent years quietly watching Indira, learning how the system works from the inside. In private, he tells his confidants that when the time comes, the party will need someone serious, not a soft-spoken ex-pilot with an Italian wife. He begins to position himself as the safe pair of hands, the technocrat who could step in if necessary. Rajiv feels the chill of that rivalry before he even dares to call it that. When he enters a room, conversations sometimes pause just a beat too long. When he speaks in party meetings, a few heavyweights exchange glances that say wordlessly, "This boy is out of his depth." He has to outgrow that image fast. Indira gives him the chance and the clock. The 1982 Asian Games are coming to Delhi, and the city is a mess. Broken roads, unfinished stadiums, slums crowding the routes foreign athletes will travel. For a government obsessed with image, failure here would be televised humiliation. Rajiv is put in charge of a key coordination committee. On paper, it's just another assignment. In reality, it is his first high-stakes test. If Delhi shines, he will glow with it. If the games collapse into chaos, it will be whispered with satisfaction that the Prime Minister's son can't even run a sports event, let alone a country. He throws himself into the work with an engineer's focus. He pushes bureaucrats, demands deadlines, insists on better equipment, telecommunication, computers. He begins talking about modernization, about a 21st century India, long before those words become slogans. The rival watches this carefully. Each new headline praising Rajiv's efficiency is a tiny cut. Each photograph of him inspecting venues, flanked by officials who used to bow only to Indira, is a warning that the party's future might be bypassing the old guard entirely. The Asian Games open in November 1982 under bright lights and flying pigeons. The stadiums are ready, the color television coverage is a minor revolution in Indian homes, and the world sees a capital that seems, at last, more modern than mythical. When Rajiv appears on screen with athletes and organizers, he no longer looks like a man who stumbled into politics by accident. He looks dangerously like a leader in training. But even as Delhi celebrates, other parts of India are boiling over. In Assam, students and local groups launch a furious agitation against foreigners, demanding the expulsion of alleged illegal migrants from Bangladesh. Protests turn violent, elections are boycotted, and the image of a stable Congress order starts to crack. In Punjab, the situation is far worse. What began as demands for greater autonomy has mutated into something darker. Militants led by Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale occupy the Golden Temple complex in Amritsar, stockpiling weapons in one of the holiest shrines of Sikhism. Assassinations and bombings spread fear. Every day, Indira's security briefings grow more grim. Rajiv is not yet making the key decisions, but he is close enough now to see how terrifying they are. He travels as his mother's envoy, listens to local leaders, meets party workers whose colleagues have been killed. He senses something that the older politicians, hardened by decades in Delhi, seem to take for granted: that each act of state force will leave a scar on ordinary people, that each compromise dropped will feed someone's rage. Then comes June 1984. Indira Gandhi, convinced that negotiations have failed and that the integrity of India is at stake, orders the army into the Golden Temple. Operation Blue Star is brutal and bloody. Tanks roll through streets where pilgrims once walked barefoot. Bullets fly in the courtyards where prayers used to echo. When it is over, the militants are dead or captured, and so are hundreds of civilians. The Akal Takht, the temporal seat of Sikh authority, is shattered by artillery. Television does not show the worst of it, but the word spreads faster than any broadcast. The Indian state has attacked the Sikh community's most sacred site. Thousands of miles away, Sikh diaspora communities protest. In Punjab, grief turns instantly into anger. And among Indira's own Sikh bodyguards, something cracks beyond repair. Inside the Prime Minister's residence, security officers warn her repeatedly, change your guards, keep a distance, reduce contact. She refuses. How can I dismiss people who have served me faithfully? She asks. Rajiv hears those warnings. He sees the rising threat level in the daily reports. He watches his mother drive out each morning past lines of armed men, some of whom now look at her with complicated eyes. He tries to persuade her to take more precautions. She listens, but her decisions are her own, forged in a lifetime of defiance. The tension is now almost unbearable. His own political clock is also speeding up. In 1983, he is made General Secretary of the Indian National Congress, in charge of organizational affairs. It is a massive promotion, dropping him right into the boiler room of power. He now has authority over candidate selection, party campaigns, internal discipline, the levers that determine who rises and who falls in Congress ranks. To the rival, this is a declaration of war. Behind closed doors, senior leaders grumble that a political novice is being handed too much influence. The rival begins to build his own network, quietly reminding colleagues that dynasties are not the only way to run a party, that stability requires experience, not just charisma and a famous surname. At public rallies, though, the picture is different. Rajiv's face appears on posters next to Indira's. Crowds chant his name. Women push forward to touch his hand. Men tell him about their unemployed sons and broken irrigation canals, hoping that he, unlike the jaded veterans, might still be honest enough to care. He moves through this chaos at high speed, barely sleeping, constantly flying between states. He has perhaps one, maybe two election cycles at most to prove that he can hold the country together after Indira, or watch the Congress machine break apart into regional fragments controlled by men like his rival. Then, one October morning in 1984, the hypothetical future becomes a brutal present. It is the 31st. Indira Gandhi leaves her residence at Safdarjung Road, walking down the stone path toward an interview with a foreign television crew. Two of her Sikh bodyguards stand at their posts. As she approaches, they raise their weapons. The sound of automatic gunfire rips through the quiet lane. Bullets tear into her body, ripping blood through the white of her sari. She collapses on the gravel. Panic explodes. Guards shout, drag her into a car, rush toward the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. The news travels through Delhi by whispers first, then by radio flashes. The Prime Minister has been shot. Rajiv is not there. He is in West Bengal when the call comes. His plane on the tarmac, rotors still, seconds stretching into decades. By the time he reaches Delhi, his mother is already gone. Doctors have done what they can. There is more blood than life left in the room where her body lies. Outside the hospital, chaos gathers like a storm. Ministers, party leaders, intelligence chiefs, stunned relatives, all crowd into a small chamber to decide very quickly what must happen next. India cannot be left without a head of government even for a day. Enemies, foreign and domestic, are watching. The army needs orders. The bureaucracy needs signatures. The markets are already trembling. The rival sees his chance. Constitutionally, there is no automatic rule that the Prime Minister's child must succeed. In that tight, airless room, alternative scenarios float unspoken in the air. A senior minister steps forward, discreetly suggesting that perhaps an interim prime minister from among the cabinet, someone experienced, someone like him, should take over until the next elections to avoid overburdening Rajiv in his grief. This is the knife fight behind the curtain. Someone else pushes back. Others remember the scale of mourning in the streets, the deep emotional bond between the Gandhi name and the Congress vote bank. They know that without a Gandhi at the top, the coming elections could be a massacre for the party. Time is measured now not in days but in minutes. The president is waiting. The Constitution allows him to swear in a new prime minister almost immediately. The question is, whom? Rajiv, still numb, still wearing the stunned face of a son who has just lost his mother, is told, almost bluntly, that he must decide. Either he accepts the office now, today, within hours, or he risks watching the party split around his feet, his rival gathering. Support in the name of stability. He hesitates for a heartbeat. Then the choice is made, perhaps less by him than by the tidal force of expectation around him. Senior leaders, sensing where history is flowing, come forward one by one to publicly, loudly demand that he be sworn in. The rival, seeing the wave turn, steps back. The president is informed. That same evening, as Indira's body still lies in state, Rajiv Gandhi, 40 years old, takes the oath as Prime Minister of India. The country has swapped one Gandhi for another in a single day. To the outside world, it looks neat, almost choreographed. Inside Rajiv's head, it feels like a cockpit going dark mid-flight, alarms screaming and a strange voice saying, "You are the captain now." He has no honeymoon. Within hours of the assassination, anti-Sikh violence erupts in Delhi and other cities. Mobs, some led by local Congress figures, hunt down Sikh men and boys. Turbans are ripped off. Petrol is poured over bodies. Flames rise in the dim alleys of the capital. Trains arrive with stories of massacres. Gurdwaras burn. The new prime minister faces his first test not in parliament but in the streets. He is told that the anger is natural, that people need to vent. He hears terrible, poisonous phrases. When a big tree falls, the earth shakes, a line that will haunt his legacy. He is navigating shock, grief, confusion, and a party machine that, at the local level, is not entirely under his control. History will judge him harshly for those days. Critics will say he did too little, too late, that he should have moved faster, sent the army in sooner, spoken more clearly, punished more of his own. Supporters will argue that information was confused, that he was overwhelmed, that the scale of the pogroms was not immediately clear. What is undeniable is that the blood of innocent Sikhs in 1984 stains the frame of his ascent to power. It will never fully wash out. And yet politics does not pause for mourning or morality. An election has already been scheduled for the end of the year. For Congress, it is both an opportunity and a trap. Sympathy for the assassinated Indira is at its peak. If they move fast, they can ride that wave to a huge majority, shutting down rivals inside the party and opposition forces outside. If they delay, the anger over Operation Blue Star, the riots, and years of accumulated grievances could turn against them. Rajiv has less than 2 months to transform himself from accidental prime minister into a convincing national leader, or risk being remembered as a placeholder who squandered his mother's last gift. He launches into the most intense campaign of his life. Helicopters thrum across India's skies, ferrying him between stadiums and Maidan grounds. In city after city, he stands before microphones, framed by giant posters of Indira, and promises a new India, a corruption-free, modern scientific nation that his generation will build. He speaks of computers, satellites, rural telephones, education. He talks less of ideology than of efficiency, of turning India into a country that can stand shoulder to shoulder with the most advanced nations. For a population weary of slogans and shortages, this sounds like fresh air. The rival has no such platform. Denied the chance to become interim prime minister, sidelined in strategy meetings, he realizes that the electorate is not being asked to choose between competing Congress leaders, but between Congress under Rajiv and a fractured, squabbling opposition. Bitter, he begins to calculate a different path. If Rajiv wins too big, he will be unassailable. Better perhaps to wait and let power itself corrode the new leader. December 1984. The results come in like a tidal wave. Congress wins 404 out of 514 seats in the Lok Sabha, the largest majority in India's history. Entire states turn one color on the electoral map. Many opposition heavyweights lose their deposits. The message, at least on paper, is unmistakable. The Indian people, in their grief and their hope, have handed Rajiv Gandhi near absolute power, but buried in those numbers are warning signs. In Punjab and some Sikh-majority areas, Congress is battered. In pockets of Assam and other troubled regions, the party's vote bank has begun to crack. The anti-Sikh riots have not been forgotten. Operation Blue Star has not been forgiven. The mandate is enormous, but it is also uneven, fragile in some corners. On the night the final tallies are announced, Rajiv returns to his official residence, now lit up like a festival. Firecrackers explode in the distance. Supporters dance outside the gates. Inside, in a room that still smells faintly of his mother's perfume, he sits alone for a moment and looks at the thick folders of government files waiting on his desk. He has become, in the span of a few weeks, one of the most powerful elected leaders on earth. He has a rival inside his own house who is already counting down to the day when this bright, clean image will be tarnished. He has a country trembling between the promise of modernization and the pull of division and revenge. He has a staggering majority in Parliament, and with it nowhere to hide when things go wrong, and he has almost no time. India in the mid-1980s is a bomb ticking on several fronts. Insurgencies in Punjab and the Northeast, economic stagnation, a bloated bureaucracy, Cold War pressures, rising corruption. The boy who once loved engines because they followed predictable rules is now at the controls of a machine that refuses to behave, driven by millions of conflicting desires. Tomorrow he must choose his cabinet, balance factions, reward allies, neutralize his internal rival without triggering open war. Next week he must present his vision to Parliament. Next month the first crisis will land on his desk, then another, then a third, each more complex and more dangerous than the last. The pilot has finally taken full command of the aircraft. But the engines are old, the fuel is limited, and somewhere out in the dark, unseen but already moving toward him, are the scandals. Rebellions and betrayals that will test not just his skills, but the very idea of what India wants from its leaders. The landslide that was supposed to save him is actually a trap. 404 seats, the biggest majority in India's history. Commentators call it a coronation. Newspapers hail a new dawn. Party workers throw rose petals until the carpets of his official residence look like they're bleeding. But inside the low beige rooms of South Block, Rajiv Gandhi sees something else. 404 seats means 404 expectations. 404 potential rebellions if he stumbles. No coalition partners to blame, no obstructing allies, no excuses. Absolute power, and a clock that starts ticking the moment he sits in the Prime Minister's chair. 5 years. 5 years to clean up a system that has been rotting for decades. 5 years to make India modern without tearing it apart. 5 years before the next election, before his rival in the shadows can say, "I warned you." He was never ready. He has to move fast. The first test is the cabinet. Names fly back and forth in hushed conversations. Loyalists, old war horses, sons and daughters of regional bosses who must be rewarded. The rival expects a grand prize, a heavyweight ministry that would keep him close to the levers of money and policy, close enough to watch and perhaps to steer. Rajiv shocks them. He brings in younger faces, technocrats, men with degrees in engineering and economics, not just in political loyalty. He gives important portfolios to people who talk about long-term restructuring and productivity, not just about managing the base. The rival gets a respectable role, but not the one he wanted, not the one that would let him sit on Rajiv's shoulder. It looks from the outside like a generational coup. Within months, a new phrase begins to glow in the newspapers. Mr. Clean. Compared to the cigar-smoking deal-makers of the past, Rajiv looks almost ascetic. No drink, no late-night parties, no commission agents sitting in his living room. He talks about honesty with the easy confidence of someone who has not yet been fully introduced to the price of it. He also talks obsessively about technology. In a country where people still queue for hours to make a trunk call, he dreams of telephones in every village. In offices where files are still tied with red string and eaten by termites, he imagines computers humming in steel racks. He invites bearded engineers with strange accent-mixed Hindi into the corridors of power and tells them, "Do what you need to do. Break the walls." The bureaucracy blinks. Computers? Many of them see only one thing: job cuts. Secretaries whisper that machines will replace humans. Trade unions protest in front of banks that are installing terminals and ATMs. Editorials warn about soulless technology invading a spiritual nation. Rajiv doesn't flinch. He pushes the creation of CDOT to develop indigenous telecom technology. He backs satellite programs, computer education, electronic exchanges. He tells audiences that India can either ride the coming digital wave or be drowned by it. He is not just trying to drag India into the 20th century. In his head, he is already designing a 21st. The rival watches this with mixed horror and reluctant respect. On one hand, it is working. Middle-class urban Indians, hungry for change, begin to worship the young prime minister who speaks their language. Efficiency, science, opportunity. On the other hand, each success pushes the old guard further into the background. The Congress that once ran on patronage and personal favors is being asked to run on performance. That is not how they learned politics. But modernization is only one front. The country is on fire in too many corners for technology alone to matter. In Assam, the agitation that nearly tore the state apart under Indira continues to smolder. Student leaders who once burned effigies of the central government now sit across the table from Rajiv's negotiators. It is August 1985 when, after endless drafts and midnight bargaining, the Assam Accord is finally signed. In that room, the walls sweat with tension. If he gives too much, he risks signaling that violent protest works. If he gives too little, Assam could be lost to secessionists and militants forever. Peace in the Northeast is not just about one state, it is about the map of India. The clock is vicious. The longer the talks drag, the more martyrs each side accumulates. By night's end, he has chosen a line, recognized the fears over illegal immigration, promised to update electoral rolls, offer development, funds, swear that the center will listen. When the ink dries on the accord, he believes, with that dangerous clarity only the young in power have, that dialogue can convince any rebel to put down a gun. The same belief takes him to Punjab. In 1985, he tries to pull a broken state back from the edge by signing an agreement with moderate Sikh leader Harchan Singh Longowal. The Rajiv Longowal Accord promises more autonomy, compensation for those hurt in Operation Blue Star, and a path away from militancy. For a moment, it feels like a turning point. Then, a few weeks later, Longowal is assassinated by extremists who brand him a traitor. Rajiv is learning brutally fast that pen strokes in Delhi do not always survive bullets in the fields. Every promise of peace he makes can make someone else pull a trigger. Still, he keeps trying. In the remote hills of Mizoram, an insurgency that has lasted 2 decades finally bends. Negotiations, amnesties, and patience culminate in the Mizo Accord of 1986. Rebels surrender weapons. A hostile underground government agrees to rejoin India's constitutional framework, and for once a region truly quiets down. It is one of his clearest successes, but even here the victory is double-edged. To make peace, you must talk to those who have taken up arms. To talk to those who have taken up arms is to anger those who never did. Each accord that brings former rebels into the mainstream irritates loyal Congress functionaries who never fired a shot, never burned a bus, but now feel bypassed. First they fight the state, then we reward them with power, grumbles one old party man to the rival over tea. What message is that for those of us who stayed loyal? The rival stores the resentment carefully. Discontent is a currency. You don't spend it until the exchange rate is high. While the frontiers burn and quiet and burn again, Rajiv tries something even more radical. He wants to rewrite the way power flows inside India, not just at the top, down to the very bottom. He pushes for Panchayati Raj reforms, for constitutional amendments that would permanently empower local village councils and urban bodies, give them money, authority, a voice independent of state-level bosses. He wants 18-year-olds to vote, convinced that a younger electorate will be less trapped in old loyalties. To the average villager, these are distant debates. To the entrenched political class, they are a direct threat. Why should some schoolteacher with a panchayat seat get money directly from Delhi? A senior state leader snorts, "He doesn't even touch my feet properly." These men have spent decades treating districts like private estates. Rajiv's reforms feel like land reform for power itself. In Parliament, he battles for these changes with a mathematician's conviction. The number of layers between the rupee sanctioned in Delhi and the rupee that reaches a village must reduce. Corruption is a series of toll gates. Remove enough gates, maybe the journey becomes honest. But outside Parliament, another kind of bill arrives on his desk, one soaked in gas and grief. December 1984, Bhopal. A toxic cloud from the Union Carbide factory has killed thousands in a single terrifying night. Mothers have stumbled through black fumes carrying dead infants. Entire slums have choked awake into nightmare. It is bare weeks after he took office. Rajiv flies to the city, walks through hospitals where people with chemical burns stare at him through milk-white eyes. Doctors whisper that they don't even know what was in the gas. The air smells of medicine, disinfectant, and something else. Rust, maybe, or the memory of poison. Everyone wants the same impossible thing. Justice fast, compensation now, someone to blame. The world watches to see if the young prime minister will take on a giant American corporation and its powerful backers. For a moment, it seems like he might. Then, in a single quiet move, the chairman of Union Carbide, Warren Anderson, is allowed to leave India after being arrested. Years later, conspiracy theories will knot themselves around that decision. Pressure from Washington, secret phone calls, whispered deals. The truth is tangled in redacted notes and dead men's memories. What remains is the perception. The system protected the powerful again. For many of the poor, that is the day when Mr. Clean becomes not a savior, but just another man in a white kurta standing between them and justice. The rival, sensing the first hairline crack in Rajiv's image, smiles behind closed doors. He does not have to attack directly. He just has to wait and let the disappointment spread. Then comes a case that detonates right in the core of Rajiv's own self-image as a modern rational reformer, Shah Bano. An elderly Muslim woman wins a landmark Supreme Court judgment granting her alimony from her husband after divorce. The decision is hailed as a victory for women's rights, for a uniform sense of justice above personal law. Rajiv, trained in European universities, instinctively agrees. India, in his mind, must be a secular republic where equality does not depend on religion. But the backlash is fierce. Some conservative Muslim leaders call the judgment an attack on Sharia, a violation of minority rights. Protests swell. Delegations come to his office. They warn that if he does not reverse the ruling, he will lose the trust of a key vote bank. The clock ticks louder than ever. Elections in a few years, communal tensions always hovering beneath the surface. One misstep and the delicate balance could shatter. He caves. The government pilots the Muslim Women, Protection of Rights on Divorce Act, effectively overturning the Supreme Court judgment. It is advertised as a protection, but many women's groups see it as a retreat, a surrender to conservative patriarchy. To balance the optics with Hindu sentiment, local officials in Ayodhya quietly ordered the unlocking of the gates of the Babri Masjid, at allowing Hindu worship inside a structure already disputed for decades. What was once a simmering local religious tension begins to rise to a national boil. Rajiv, in trying to appease both sides, ends up fueling something neither he nor his advisors fully understand: a new, aggressive brand of identity politics. The rival is almost impressed. He doesn't need to scheme. The prime minister is cutting his own support with surgical precision. Liberals feel betrayed over Shah Bano. Secularists feel queasy about Ayodhya. Conservative clerics mistrust him anyway. And in this vacuum, a smaller party with a saffron flag begins to find its voice. The Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP. Outside, new enemies are gathering. Inside, old friends are sharpening their knives. Foreign policy at first seems like a space where Rajiv can breathe. He charms Western leaders with his easy English and tech talk. He visits Moscow and Washington, maintaining India's non-aligned balance in the last icy years of the Cold War. He speaks of disarmament, of a nuclear-free world, of South-South cooperation. But even diplomacy comes with its own handcuffs. In Sri Lanka, a brutal civil war between the Sinhalese majority government and Tamil Tigers is spilling over into India's domestic politics. Tamil populations in India demand support for their ethnic kin across the sea. Refugees flee north in boats. The Sri Lankan government, desperate, turns to Delhi. Rajiv sees a chance to play peacemaker, to prove that India can shape its region not through domination but through mediation. In July 1987, he signs the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord with President J.R. Jayawardene. The agreement promises devolution of power to Sri Lankan Tamils and disarmament of the insurgent LTTE to be supervised by an Indian peacekeeping force, the IPKF. Peacekeeping. The word itself is a seduction. He imagines Indian soldiers standing between former enemies, helping them transition to democracy. Instead, almost overnight, those soldiers find themselves fighting the very Tamil militants they were sent to reassure. The IPKF bleeds in jungles and villages it barely understands. Stories of torture, civilian casualties, botched raids seep back to India. At one ceremonial visit to Colombo, as Rajiv inspects a guard of honor, a Sri Lankan sailor steps out of line and swings his rifle. The bayonet slicing toward the Indian Prime Minister's head. The blow lands partly on his shoulder. Cameras catch his startled stumble. It is over in seconds. But something invisible has shifted. The danger that once seemed theoretical has stepped physically into his space, close enough to smell. By the late 1980s, the clock that once looked generous has turned hostile. The economy is wheezing. Foreign exchange reserves are thinning. His modernization push has created islands of progress, computer centers, telecom nodes, bright young engineers, in a sea of stubborn poverty. The poor still stand in ration queues. The rich still find ways to escape the rules. His clean image, meanwhile, is about to be shattered from an unexpected direction. A snowy, neutral country far from India's dust, Sweden, Bofors. In April 1987, Swedish radio breaks a story. Bribes have been paid in a multi-crore artillery deal between Bofors, a Swedish arms manufacturer, and the government of India. The money, journalists allege, has gone to secret middlemen and influential Indians. For a country used to corruption, it should have been just another scandal. But this time, the taint reaches straight to the top. Rajiv had publicly declared that there were no middlemen in defense deals under his watch. He had staked his credibility on it. Now every newspaper headline with the word Bofors feels like a personal accusation. He denies wrongdoing, orders inquiries, insists that neither he nor his family has taken a paisa. Yet, drip by drip, the story thickens. Swiss bank accounts, code names, a shadowy Italian businessman close to his family whispers of kickbacks routed through a maze of shell firms. The opposition seizes the chance. So does a man from within his own house, Vishwanath Pratap Singh, his former finance and then defense minister who had once been seen as an ally in the fight against corruption. VP Singh breaks ranks, demands full disclosure, starts positioning himself as the conscience of the nation. The rival inside Congress has a choice. He could rally the party around Rajiv, crush dissent, and demand loyalty. Or he could do something subtler, let Singh go, let the outrage grow, preserve his own reputation as an experienced elder who warned against haste. He chooses silence. Silence and careful meetings in dimly lit bungalows where regional leaders gather to discuss what happens after. In Parliament, Rajiv faces the most humiliating debates of his life. Opposition MPs thunder that the man who promised honesty has lied. Pamphlets with cartoons of him as a puppet of arms dealers circulate. Street protests echo with the single ugly word, Bofors. Bofors! Bofors! It is slow poison. Every time he tries to talk about telecom reforms, about literacy campaigns, about village roads, journalists bring the questions back to Bofors. Every press conference is a cross-examination. Every rally is half about his promises and half about his defense. Inside, the pilot's mind looks for clear dials, for numbers to trust. But politics is haze. There are no instruments that will tell him exactly how much altitude he has lost with the average voter. Meanwhile, the ground below is cracking. Punjab remains volatile. Militants attack police, bomb markets, assassinate moderate voices. The dream of a quick return to normalcy after the accord is dead. The IPKF in Sri Lanka has turned from peacekeepers to an occupying enemy in Tamil eyes, feeding a bitter hatred that is silently, invisibly bending itself toward Rajiv personally. Communal fault lines, widened by the Shah Bano reversal and Ayodhya, give the BJP a simple, powerful narrative. Here is a man who governs by appeasement, who bows to minority hardliners one day and plays temple politics the next. They promise clarity. He looks increasingly complicated. The rival sees it all and does the one thing that hurts Rajiv most. He waits. He does not resign in protest. That would make him a martyr under Rajiv's spotlight. He does not mount an open rebellion that would force fence-sitters to choose sides too early. Instead, he consolidates his network, tells younger politicians in private that the Congress will survive beyond any one individual, and reminds business allies that he is still around, still experienced, still untouched by Bofors. By 1989, the 5-year clock is almost out. The campaign for the general election begins under a harsh, unforgiving sun. It feels like a replay of 1984, but in negative. The same helicopters buzz, but the crowds below are smaller, more restless. The same party banners wave, but the slogans are edged with doubt. On stages across India, Rajiv's voice is deeper now, more strained, as he talks of stability, of what has been built, the roads, the schools, the telephones in villages that once had only silence. Opponents answer with a single refrain, "What about Bofors?" He tries to turn the election into a choice between continuity and chaos, between a known prime minister and a ragtag coalition, led by VP Singh, supported, in a strange temporary alliance, by communists on one side and the BJP on the other. It should be an easy argument. A fractured alliance, a weak economy, simmering insurgencies. Surely people will choose the pilot already in the cockpit rather than hand the controls to a committee? But the scandal has done its work. The image of Mr. Clean is smeared. The promise of a corruption-free era has curdled into a bitter joke in tea stalls and train compartments. On counting day, the results appear slowly on Doordarshan, the government broadcaster that once seemed like Rajiv's personal megaphone, now reading out his own verdict. Congress has fallen from 404 seats to just 197, still the largest single party, but nowhere near a majority. The National Front coalition led by VP Singh, with outside support from the left and the BJP, moves quickly. They may despise each other, but they despise the idea of another Gandhi in power even more. For a fleeting moment, some of Rajiv's advisors urge him to fight. With careful bargaining, with regional allies bought or coerced, he could perhaps stitch together a shaky coalition and cling on. This is the part of Indian politics the rival knows by heart. The midnight deal, the suitcase promises, the threats hidden in polite language. Rajiv refuses. He will not, he says, head a government propped up by unstable purchased loyalties. If the people have reduced his mandate, he will sit in opposition, not pretend he still has a moral majority. To some, it sounds like dignity. To others, it sounds like political naivety. To his rival, it sounds like opportunity. The man who once occupied the biggest office in the country now walks into the Lok Sabha and takes his place across the aisle, among the opposition benches. The green desks are the same. The microphones are the same. The rows of faces are largely the same. Only the direction of his gaze has changed. Now, when the Prime Minister rises to speak, it will be someone else. He will be the one questioning, the one attacking, the one whose words carry less direct power but more freedom. The pilot has been moved from the cockpit to the passenger cabin. But even here, the clock does not stop. His name is still famous, his party still vast, his rival still waiting in the corridor shadows. The scandals that pulled him down are not finished with him. Investigations continue, rumors flare, alliances shift. Outside Parliament, new forces of anger and faith are marching, drawing straight lines toward Ayodhya and beyond. Inside his own head, another countdown has begun. The time he has to redeem himself, to reclaim the narrative, to prove that the fall of 1989 is not the end of his story, but just a turn in its path. He believes, with a stubbornness that surprises even him, that he will have another chance. He does not yet know that his real deadline is far shorter than another election cycle. Somewhere in the South, in dense jungles and secret camps, men who once welcomed and then hated the Indian soldiers in their homeland are speaking his name with cold, quiet rage. They remember the accord he signed, the troops he sent, the blood that followed. For them, the countdown is not to his comeback. It is to something far more final. The last photograph of Rajiv Gandhi alive is almost too ordinary. A dusty ground in a small town called Sriperumbudur, a string of bare bulbs, plastic chairs, party flags drooping in the humid night. He's bent slightly forward, smiling, as a young woman in a green salwar kameez leans in to garland him. 7 seconds later, there is no face to smile. 7 seconds, and the man who once held 404 seats in Parliament is a torn figure on the ground, his white kurta soaked, his shoes blasted off his feet, his last campaign speech still folded in his pocket. To understand how he reaches that point, from the cockpit of power to a crater in the dirt, you have to go back to the moment he falls out of the sky. He sits now on the opposition benches. The green leather of his chair is the same. The microphones are the same. The portraits of dead leaders staring down from the Lok Sabha walls are the same. He is not. This Rajiv Gandhi is older by years that don't show only on the calendar. The pilot's certainty has been sanded down by Bhopal and Bofors, by Shah Bano and Sri Lanka, by elections won in a wave of grief and lost in a mudslide of suspicion. The once effortless smile has grown an edge. The eyes, once open and almost naive, scan the house like they're looking for turbulence. He has a different kind of deadline now. Not 5 years with a majority, but an unknown shrinking window in which to do what his mother did after 1977, turn defeat into rebirth. His rival, the old Congress warhorse who survived Indira, Sanjay, and every storm since, senses this shift and adjusts his stance. For decades he knew how to block, bargain, whisper. Now he must decide, help the fallen prince climb back or prepare to inherit the ruins. He chooses a third option. He waits, watching from the cool shade of his bungalow as India's new rulers stumble into their own traps. Across the aisle, Prime Minister V.P. Singh takes the oath as the man who brought down Rajiv over Bofors. He is backed by an uneasy trio, socialists, communists, and on the Hindu nationalist right, a small but hungry party with a saffron flag, the BJP. On paper, it is everything Rajiv warned of. A fragile coalition glued not by a shared vision but by a shared hatred of him. Outside Parliament, another clock is ticking. The Mandal Commission report, which had gathered dust for years, is suddenly pulled out and set alight. In August 1990, VP Singh announces that the government will implement its central recommendation, job reservations for other backward classes in central government services. On television, the announcement looks dry, bureaucratic. In the streets, it explodes. Upper caste students pour out in protest. Campuses turn into battlegrounds. Young men douse themselves in kerosene and strike matches in front of horrified cameras. Reservation for them feels like a stolen future. For millions of lower caste families, Mandal is a long-delayed key to locked doors. Rajiv watches this from the opposition benches, the son of a woman who once crushed a nationwide railway strike with one sentence. He understands power. He also understands that this is not just a policy debate. It is a rewiring of India's social circuitry. He has a choice. Oppose Mandal and grab the anger of the streets, or support it and hold on to his claim of standing for the weak and the poor. He chooses the second. On the floor of the House, he backs the principle of reservations for the historically oppressed, even as he warns about the chaos of V.P. Singh's timing. In that moment, he is not the easiest person to be. Anguished middle-class supporters accuse him of betrayal. Dalit and backward caste leaders remain suspicious, remembering Congress's long years of half-promises. The rival in his own party sniffs an opening. He is cutting his own middle-class base. He tells a gathering of state satraps over tea and biscuits. First Bofors, now this. Let us be patient. But Mandal is only half the storm. The other half has a chariot. In September 1990, BJP leader L.K. Advani climbs into a Toyota truck modified to look like a mythic Rath and begins a pilgrimage of a different kind, the Ramrath Yatra, rolling through towns and villages toward Ayodhya, demanding a temple on the site of the disputed Babri Masjid. Television cameras follow the orange pennants and the rising crowds. Slogans about Lord Ram merge with calls to avenge appeasement, to right historic wrongs. It is emotion sharpened into a political spear. Rajiv, who once unlocked the gates of that disputed structure in a fumbling attempt to balance Shah Bano, now watches as the door he cracked is kicked open by others. The BJP is growing on the fuel he spilled. The tension snaps when Advani is arrested in Bihar on V.P. Singh's orders. The BJP walks out of the coalition, bringing the government down. The same day, a man who had built his entire image on honesty walks out of the Prime Minister's residence with his term cut short. For a brief electric moment, the field looks open. There is a sliver of time, measured in days and deal memos, when Rajiv could step forward, offer stability, and try to reclaim the throne with new allies. His rival urges caution. The numbers are messy, he hints. If Congress backs another leader from outside, they can watch him fail and sweep back clean later. Instead, India gets an interim answer. Chandrasekhar, a veteran socialist with a tiny party and a fragile soul, becomes prime minister, with Congress support from outside. Rajiv has him on a string now. For the first time, he gets to play the role that others once used against him, the unseen force propping up a shaky regime. The countdown to the next election is no longer a constitutional timetable. It's a weapon in his pocket. The rival sneers in private. This boy thinks he can run governments by remote, he mutters to a confidant. He forgets how quickly remotes lose batteries. They don't have long to wait. Rumors begin to swirl that Chandrasekhar's government has ordered surveillance on Rajiv, strange men on motorcycles near his house, phone lines that suddenly crackle and die. It may be paranoia, it may be true. In Delhi, sometimes the line between them is thinner than a wiretap. Rajiv seizes on it. He accuses the government of spying, withdraws Congress support, and in one swift motion pulls the plug. Chandrasekhar, who once dreamed of remaking Indian politics, becomes a footnote, his prime ministership one of the shortest in history. Elections are announced for 1991. This is it. No more practice runs, no more safety nets. If he loses again, the Congress old guard will not forgive him. The Gandhi name will be demoted from destiny to burden. He is 46 years old, but in the ruthless maths of his party, a two-time loser can age a decade overnight. His rival moves. In party corridors and drawing rooms where portraits of Nehru stare down like silent judges, whispers thicken. Maybe someone else should lead the campaign. Maybe Rajiv should step aside for the good of the party. Names are floated, some as stalking horses, one as a serious alternative. The rival himself, who presents his caution as wisdom, his reluctance as sacrifice. The conflict that has simmered for years, old versus young, machine politics versus modernist instinct, comes to a head in rooms. With heavy curtains and thicker cigarette smoke, Rajiv fights back, not with his mother's threats, but with numbers. He pulls in state leaders who still owe their careers to his 1984 wave, reminds them that without the Gandhi surname at the top, Congress votes could scatter in panic. You may not love me, he says in one private meeting, but the people still recognize me. The rival underestimates one thing: fear. Fear of losing the election. Fear of being left without even the shadow of a Nehru Gandhi behind them. In the final tally, that fear defeats his quiet campaign. Rajiv is reconfirmed as Congress president and de facto prime ministerial candidate. He has won the right to gamble his future one more time. The campaign that follows is a ghostly echo of 1984, but without the protective fog of sympathy. The helicopters are older, their paint dulled. The crowds are different too, more skeptical, more fractured by Mondal and Mondir, by hunger and hope. Rajiv himself has changed. Gone is the wide-eyed technocrat who talked about computers like toys for a better tomorrow. This Rajiv speaks in a lower register, more introspective. At rallies, he acknowledges mistakes, speaks of learning, of discipline, of the need for a strong, stable government in a dangerous time. Dangerous is not a metaphor anymore. Soviet tanks are rusting back home. The Cold War is dying. In the Gulf, Saddam Hussein has challenged America and been crushed. Oil prices jerk and spasm. In India, foreign exchange reserves are so low that officials whisper about how many weeks of imports the country can afford before something breaks. He promises to navigate it. He also makes a quieter promise, mostly to himself, to fix what he left half done. The Panchayati Raj amendments strengthening local governments, the telecom revolution still in early stages. The idea of an India that isn't just a poor nation with a handful of rich elites, but a place where middle-class dreams are more than fantasy. He has, by the official calendar, 5 years to try if he wins. By another invisible clock, he has exactly 31 days. Hundreds of kilometers to the south, in the jungles of northern Sri Lanka, another drama is underway. The LTTE, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, remember Indian peacekeeping force bullets, remember comrades killed, remember a war they never asked India to fight on their soil. In their narrative, Rajiv Gandhi is not a would-be reformer or the grandson of Nehru. He is the man who betrayed the Tamil cause, sent soldiers to disarm them and left only after bloody, bitter combat. Their leader, Velupillai Prabhakaran, is a quiet presence in the background of grainy videos. Orders move down the chain. Names are chosen. The plan takes shape with the cold patience of professional killers. They will strike him in India, on his soil, during his favorite ritual, the election rally. As Rajiv crisscrosses states in the sultry May heat, microphones in hand, sweat darkening his kurta, the human bomb they have chosen moves too. A young woman known as Danu, trained to smile, trained to kill. The countdown is now happening in parallel. In Delhi's war rooms, planners mark phases of the election in red ink on maps. In the LTTE's safe houses, someone else marks his probable appearances with equal care. He flies, they drive, he makes speeches, they rehearse how to get close. On May 20th, he is in Andhra Pradesh, his voice hoarse, his security details stretched thin by endless stops. The next day, he is scheduled for Tamil Nadu, a state where Congress is weaker, where regional alliances are tenuous, where one more push might mean the difference between kingmaker and has-been. Senior aides suggest he skip the smaller rallies, focus on the big cities. The schedule is brutal, the heat is merciless. But in the arithmetic of votes, every constituency counts. He agrees to go to a small town near Madras called Sriperumbudur. May 21st, 1991, evening. The rally venue is a patch of open ground, strung with colored lights that make everything look slightly unreal, like a traveling fair. Loudspeakers crackle with film songs remixed into campaign jingles. Local Congress workers fuss over barricades that are more form than substance. Security men, sweating in their suits, try to keep a perimeter in a country where every leader is expected to be touchable. He arrives late. As his car door swings open, the crowd surges forward. Hands reach out, for blessings, for a handshake, for a story to tell their grandchildren. He steps down without a bulletproof shield, as he often does. A life lived with assassinations has somehow not cured him of the instinct to be available. There is a narrow path marked out by a rope. Along it wait local leaders, garlands poised. Among them is a woman in a green and orange salwar, her hair tied back, a sandalwood garland in her hands. Danu. She has a belt of explosives strapped to her waist, hidden by her clothes, wired to a switch by her hip. She has been trained to move only when she sees his face, feel the warmth of him, smell the faint cologne mixed with sweat. The cameras are rolling. He walks slowly, smiling, pausing to accept flowers, to bend toward a child, to exchange a joke with a worker he's seen at every Tamil rally for years. Security personnel hover, but the rope is flimsy and the culture of closeness stronger than any protocol. At 10:18 p.m., he reaches her. She steps out of line, pretending to struggle with the weight of the garland. A local leader leans in to introduce her. She bows low as if to touch his feet, an old Indian gesture of respect. She presses the switch. For a fraction of a second, nothing happens. Then the earth tears open. A white flash blooms outward, swallowing their bodies. The blast rips through flesh and cloth and bone. Shoes are hurled yards away. Cameras fall to the ground, their last frames frozen in a blur of light and flying dust. Eardrums shatter, voices vanish. When the dust settles, the scene is almost unrecognizable. Bits of clothing cling to trees. A child's slipper lies in a pool of blood. A garland, half burnt, hangs from a broken bamboo pole. The Prime Minister in waiting, the man who once commanded the largest majority in Indian history, is a shattered form on the ground. Impossible to recognize without the locket around his neck. 14 others die with him that night. Danu, torn apart by her own bomb, dies too. Within minutes, rumors race through phone lines and along highways. Within hours, images flicker on Doordarshan. A nation that has watched one Gandhi burned, another shot, now watches the third return in a coffin wrapped in the tricolor. In Delhi, as the casket is carried down the steps of the plane, his rival stands among the mourners, white hair ruffled by the hot wind from the engines. For a terrible, tempting instant, he tastes the possibility. With Rajiv gone, with Sonia Gandhi stunned into silence and their children still young, surely the party will turn to experience. To him, it doesn't. The twist belongs to someone else. In the internal chaos that follows, with elections half completed and half postponed, Congress needs a face that is not tainted by Beauforts, not polarizing, someone who can hold the pieces together without threatening the fragile Gandhi halo. They find him in an unexpected place. P. V. Narasimha Rao, a scholar politician who had been preparing to retire. The rival watches as the tide that was supposed to bring him to shore lifts another boat instead. He will never sit in the Prime Minister's chair. History will relegate him to footnotes and photographs, a flicker in the background of larger stories. Rajiv Gandhi is cremated on the banks of the Yamuna at a spot that will be called Veer Bhumi. The flames rise, the cameras zoom in. The family, Sonia, Priyanka, Rahul, stand with red-rimmed eyes, thrown into a role they never wanted. The pilot's journey is over at 46, but the plane he tried to fly is still in the air. In the election that follows, a sympathy wave lifts Congress back toward power, though not to the heights of 1984. Narasimha Rao becomes Prime Minister. Almost immediately, he faces the economic abyss Rajiv had warned of. Foreign reserves nearly gone, the threat of default looming. What happens next is the quiet continuation of many arguments Rajiv started and lost. Rao, with his finance minister Manmohan Singh, launches economic reforms that crack open India's closed economy. Licensing is dismantled. Imports are liberalized, foreign investment courted. Many of the young engineers Rajiv once championed become the vanguard of a new IT and services boom. The telecom seeds he planted, C-dot, satellite links, a belief that connectivity is power, sprout into an India where phones will one day outnumber people who can read. The Panchayati Raj amendments Rajiv fought for, blocked by states and skeptics when he was alive, finally pass under Rao in 1992-93. Local bodies get constitutional status. Women, guaranteed a third of the seats, begin to appear in dusty Panchayat halls across the country, changing the conversation in ways even Rajiv might not have fully imagined. His legacy, like his life, is untidy. Bofors lingers like a stain in every discussion of defense deals. The full truth sinks into the swamp of half-finished investigations and framed scapegoats. The Shah Bano reversal and the unlocking of Babri Masjid's gates echo into the 1990s, feeding the fire that will culminate in the demolition of the mosque in 1992 and a new era of religious polarization. Sri Lanka remains an open wound. For many Indian soldiers' families, Rajiv is the man who sent their sons into an impossible mission. For many Sri Lankan Tamils, he is the betrayer who first promised protection, then left them to the mercies of both Colombo and the Tigers. For the LTTE, his assassination is revenge. For most of the world, it is an unforgivable act that will help turn them from freedom fighters into an international pariah organization. And yet, when Indians look back from the glare of their smartphone screens and the hum of their 4G towers, they often find his silhouette in the early light, the smooth plastic of the handset, the village phone booths that once felt miraculous, the idea that a government servant's file should be on a computer, not eaten by termites, the 18-year-old in a small town casting a vote for the first time because he lowered the voting age. These are the quieter monuments he left behind. He did not live to see the India he talked about in the mid-1980s, an India plugged into satellite networks, trading software with the world, its middle class arguing over data plans instead of trunk call tokens. He did not live to see his children step into the arena he once tried to escape. He did not live long enough to finish his second attempt at power, to prove whether he had really learned from his failures. He died, as he lived in politics, in the crossfire of forces he tried to balance and sometimes unleashed. The boy who never wanted to be prime minister became the man who tried to drag a reluctant, wounded giant toward the future, and who paid for his choices with the one thing even a Gandhi cannot bequeath or reclaim: time. In the end, the pilot did not crash the plane. He simply had to let go of the controls mid-flight, leaving the rest of us to argue for decades whether he took off in the right direction and to live every day in the country that still flies on the turbulent air he helped stir.